Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, Learn to Love listeners. I'm so positively delighted that you could join us on the Learn to Love podcast. I am your host, Zach Beach, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today's episode, Dr. Debra Mandel. Dr. Mandel calls herself a love warrior who has over 30 years of experience specializing in helping individuals, couples, and families learn how to thrive in their relationships. She has appeared on hundreds of national TV and radio shows, including Raising Sextuplets, Love Handles, Tyra Banks, The Today Show, and The Early Show. She has been a regularly featured expert on CNN Headline News, The O'Reilly Factor, and Inside Edition, and is frequently sought out by journalists and reporters for her expertise in numerous areas on relationships. She is the author of Don't Call Me a Drama Queen, Dump That Chump, Your Boss Is Not Your Mother, and Healing the Sensitive Heart. She came on to the show to talk about mother-daughter relationships, which she wrote about in her latest book, Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Debra. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm very good, and I'm very excited because I hear that you have been a love warrior for over 30 years. And I'd like to think of myself also as a love warrior or maybe a love activist, just promoting this cause of love in the world. And I'm curious what this term, love warrior, means to you.
Well, I've been working with people in relationships of all sorts for years and years and years. And I know a lot of people in the way that they direct their attention toward relationships is very different than mine. And I'm really a fighter for the relationship. A lot of people will look at a relationship like either this is doomed or there's so many problems in it, why even bother? But I really think that when two people have found each other, especially if they've been together for a while, that it's really worth saving if some conditions have not occurred. In other words, if there's been active infidelity and the partner doesn't take any responsibility at all and just continues to blame the other partner, then that's a problem. Or if there's severe narcissism or drug and alcohol abuse where there is no ability to or willingness to get help, those kinds of situations will inhibit my ability to help a couple. But if there is some love present, then I'm going to fight for it.
I love that. A little bit different, I would say, than most couples therapists approach. I feel like most therapy is designed around being impartial, and a therapist might be like, you know what? I'm here to help facilitate whatever needs to happen in this relationship. If you guys need to break up, you can break up. If you guys want to stay together, I can help you stay together. But is what I'm hearing from you, you take the side of the relationship?
I do at the beginning, at least. If two people have come to see me, they probably want something. Now, certainly if a couple comes to see me and they say, we are here because we are getting divorced, we filed the papers and we just want to facilitate a communication to help us deal with the kids, that's a different story. I'm not going to talk them back into being together, but you'd be surprised. I've had people ready for divorce court, and through our relationship counseling, they have come to some new awakenings as to they still have love. And if they're still fighting with each other, then they're not indifferent. And if they're not indifferent, then there's something still present. And I generally try to focus on that.
I love that. It was interesting to hear your example of infidelity being kind of a deal breaker around if the person takes no responsibility at all. And I'm curious about the person who takes no responsibility at all for other things in the relationship. So for example, a couple comes into your office, probably hear this a lot. My partner is the problem. There is absolutely nothing wrong with me, nothing I need to look at. It's my partner's childhood conditioning that has given them attachment wounds and other things. How do you work with a partner like that?
And that's a great question because, yes, the lack of responsibility in general is a problem for relationships because at those moments, generally, I can say that person really isn't in the relationship. Because to be in a relationship means to understand that you are relating so that your behavior influences your partner and your partner influences you. Just like a mother-infant bond, the infant is not just raised by the mother, but the infant is also helping to raise the mother by teaching the mother and the father about their cues, right? So they have to be in a reciprocal, interactive dynamic of mirroring one another in order to get to a place of more truer intimacy, whatever relationship that is.
I love that. Being in relationship means taking responsibility.
It certainly does.
You've been working with couples for a long time, as you mentioned. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in how people relate in romantic partnerships?
Well, traditionally, and I don't go back this far, but historically, certainly my parents and their relationships, there were very specific rules. My mother did certain things and my father did certain things. And that was, you just look at the TV shows in the 50s and the 60s. It was very much like that. In fact, funny, I grew up with the Flintstones. And so recently I downloaded and bought the whole series of the Flintstones just to watch what was I influenced by when I was a little girl. And it was fascinating the way the portrayals of the husband, the wife, and their duties, and the way the men were so conniving in one way and the women were so conniving in another way. It's a fascinating dissection of history. So today, though, roles have become very diverse. And I think what we see in relationships now is that you need to have really impeccable and incredible communication to be defining what it is that each of your tasks and challenges are in the relationship, because we still do tend to fall into some sort of structure. People do kind of like to know what their quote unquote job description is, because that's just kind of how we roll. I mean, while we may like a lot of spontaneity and just do whatever, whenever, there is a part of human nature that likes some structure. And so in our relationships today, because that's so not defined, there is no absolute, the husband does this, the wife does this, the partner does this, the other partner does that. It's really a free-for-all, and that has to be defined and talked about ongoingly throughout the relationship, because that can change.
Absolutely. I love how you emphasize we need really impeccable communication to define what each of our tasks and challenges are in the relationship.
And who has that, by the way? I mean, who has that? It's a big learning curve. And that's why we don't ever think that we've arrived there. It's an ongoing process because we're ever changing and ever evolving. And so is our culture. And we're always adapting to what's happening in the surrounding environment.
Yeah, not only is it really a hard conversation to have, but I feel like there's so many assumptions. Like I feel like we all kind of have this assumption of what a relationship is and is supposed to operate. And a lot of it does come from the media, as you mentioned. So we both kind of come to a relationship with totally different emotional worlds that then collide.
Absolutely. And not just from culture, but from our family backgrounds as well, right? We develop our kind of internal sense of what's right and what's wrong from very early on, and what we like and what we don't like, and what our values are, and how people are supposed to be around us. And when they fail our expectations, we get into a tizzy. Many people they really unravel when somebody isn't operating in the way that they were raised to operate, or the way some cultural dynamic has taught them that people are supposed to be. So we need to grow to be more open-minded and flexible in our beliefs about what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. And I'm not saying that somebody should disavow their value system. I mean, we have a core set of values that we need to have in common with a partner. Otherwise, it's doomed to fail. But some of the things that really cause people to have difficulty is just the difference in how much space someone needs or how much time alone they need. These can be really hot topics in relationships. Like, I may need a lot of contact, you may need less, but that doesn't mean you don't love me. But my interpretation may be, if you don't want to spend all of your free time with me, that means I'm not important to you, or that you don't care about me. And that could be just spot on wrong.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was recently just listening to a book by a couples therapist, and the author was saying how nine times out of 10, a couple enters into the office because they want more connection, more closeness, more intimacy. But what a lot of couples actually need is greater ability and willingness to be alone. to be separate, to have some independence and not be so codependent on each other. And I'm curious what you do see the role of aloneness, being able to be alone, not necessarily needing somebody to fulfill all of your needs, but being able to fulfill some of your needs on your own with
I love
relationships.
that question. And I also want to just put a little caveat in there that I see a lot of couples come in where one wants more connection and the other one wants to find out a way to have more free time and not feel like their partner is disappointed in them or upset. So it's not always that people come in a cohesive bond, like this is what we really want and we don't know how to get there. Sometimes they're coming in for really diametrically opposed goals. So having said that, though, let's say that one of the issues that I discover for a couple is that they really have trouble navigating how they spend time apart and making that safe. So one of the things that I do with couples is to help them define what are safe zones in spending time alone. So for instance, let's say, sort of the stereotypic caveman guy component is, well, I want to go out with my guys and we want to drink and we want to go to strip clubs. And that may not be actually fair or reasonable to the partner. Maybe that threatens her. Maybe that threatens him. So what's important is that you have that conversation. That's back to that communication that you talk about. Where do we draw the lines? Where are the limits? What is okay and what is not okay?
Yeah, I'm curious how to make that conversation go particularly well, because a lot of couples do reach standoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the ubiquitous, go ahead, do what you want.
Ah, that's a classic, isn't it? Yeah, do whatever you want. I don't care. Uh-huh.
It's a trap.
Yeah. So what I do in that situation is I try to highlight for the couple, hey, this is not an easy conversation. Again, you both come with your own historical knowledge about what's supposed to be. You have this fantasy. We all grow up with a fantasy of what a relationship is supposed to look like. And most of the time, our partner fails us. Our partner does not meet up to that expectation. And a lot of times we haven't even spoken what that expectation is. So when you get to those stalemates or those standoff moments, then I say, look, this is hard. This is a difficult conversation. It doesn't need to be a deal breaker, though, unless it does. Of course, I'm always respectful. If somebody just perpetually says, look, I'm going to take 6 months out of the year and go travel and you're on your own, babe, then if that's, if they have kids to raise and other responsibilities, that's not going to go over too well. But if they're navigating, a couple hours here and a couple hours there and how we manage our household, how we manage our lives that way, or even if we're not married and we're not living together, then how do we do that in a way that's respectful and kind and attentive to the other person's feelings? Oftentimes, those conversations don't go well because there's a lack of empathy and there's a lack of compassion. So that's another component of the work that I do, is to really highlight how valuable and important it is for couples to be able to take on the perspective of their partner.
So I'm hearing the importance of communication, empathy, compassion, perspective taking. Are there any other ingredients to the secret sauce of relationships?
Also, we said taking responsibility for oneself, right? Big, huge thing, right? That the blame shame game does not go over well in relationships, in any relationship. It's critically important that we understand that we are an important component in how the structure and the fluidity of the relationship works.
Wonderful. So I appreciate the quick tips for relationships. And we got to shift to actually our topic for today, which I'm sure has many similar principles on improving mother-daughter relationships. So I see you have your new book, Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude. And you write in that lovely book that perhaps a more appropriate phrase than girls are made up of sugar, spice, and everything nice, which is, again, taps into different messages we've heard as kids. The more appropriate phrase is that girls are made up of sassy and rude with a big attitude. So is that what girls are made up of?
Well, remember, some of the writing in the book is to be humorous and to engage somebody in a way that is going to feel safe and fun, right? Because it's a really tough topic, actually. So I play with some of those components of, moms. A lot of the moms who might read this book, or even daughters, are going to be from that generation of, this is what we learned, this is what they're supposed to be. And what I talk about, let me just backtrack a little bit, is how so many moms, they're considered the too nice mom. And the too nice mom is somebody who maybe didn't feel, like myself, who didn't feel all that loved, who didn't feel that I had my parents' approval or attention. And so when I became a parent, I made it my duty, my goal, my sole purpose to make sure that my daughter would feel endless amounts of oozing love inside of her with self-confidence. And at times, what many moms do is they kind of create a little bit of a beast. There's a little bit of an entitlement beast. So when I say sassy and rude with a big attitude, it's kind of like lacking of the sense of, yes, that's wonderful to have that, but we need boundaries, we need discipline, we need to understand that we are not the sole center of the universe across the board. We may be the sole center of the universe for our parents or for somebody who loves us, but certainly not for the rest of the world, because we're no more special than anybody else. But a lot of I don't like to use these terms, but it's one that's well known. The millennials have this sense that, it's kind of all about me and I deserve and should have everything, but oftentimes without the hard work. So there's a long history of pendulum parenting and pendulum swings where, years and years ago, there was a really tough upper hand, spare the rod, spoil the child. A lot of physical discipline was thought to be, that's how you keep a child in order and gain respect. And then there was all this other literature and research and understanding in child development that's just really bad and dangerous for children, that they need a lot of love, they need a lot of coddling, they need a lot of nurturance. But I think we took that to such a degree that we didn't help to teach that, everybody doesn't deserve the first place award in a competition at school. That's why it's a competition. And so what if you failed? So what if you didn't even make the cut? Okay, so that's a way to get to the next step, to know where your deficits are so that you can work on those and become better at what you want to be better at.
That's so interesting. It is true that I feel like a lot of parenting was more disciplinary and almost like authoritarian back in the day. And we have shifted to being more permissive, being more warmth, being more loving. Like I even read that with each subsequent generations, dads are more and more likely to say, I love you. And that's great. And what I'm hearing from you is that sometimes that love is turned into coddling, as you mentioned, sort of an over permissiveness and over allowing. And we have to find that appropriate balance of boundaries with openness and acceptance.
I am certainly not at all a proponent of going backwards, back into authoritarian, disciplinarian. I don't like that any more than I like this excessive indulgence, right? So the concept, I think, is to create new versions. I like the word nurturance a lot. I think compassion, empathy, and nurturance, and really understanding a child's point of view is critically important. I also think that it can't be solely a child-centric family. I think a family-centric family is the best kind of family where, hey, we all are here together. This is the community. We have a small community here, whether that's 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, 7 people. It doesn't matter. It's still our sub-community that is very important, that we operate with respect and values and understanding of one another. So you know what? Sometimes mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, or whatever the combo pack is in the home says, hey, we need a little time to ourselves as well.
I love that. Rather than a child-centered family, create a family-centered family.
Yeah.
So along with the compassion and empathy piece that we talked about before, what I'm hearing from you is nurturance, respect, values, and understanding.
And in the parenting world, I think, not just the parenting world, but in any relationship, we have to have self boundaries and we have to have other boundaries, and we have to understand what those boundaries are. And they change across the developmental span, right? The boundaries we may have with a child may be very different with a teenager or with a young adult. And part of my book is about it's moms and adult daughters, right? There's so much written already about moms and teens and moms and children and parenting, et cetera. But I think there was this lack of direction for moms who have these daughters that they've raised, and they're so excited about having this relationship with their daughter that's like, okay, I've done my job. Now we get to be great friends. We're going to go to lunch. We're going to talk about your boyfriends and my relationships or your girlfriends, and just going after that component that is so fraught with anxiety and difficulties, because I think moms and daughters don't often know how to relate to each other because of this basic excessive niceness from the mom and this sort of excessive entitlement from the daughter. And by the way, none of this is meant to cast a label on someone as if they are doomed into this role. It's more about talking about understanding how these roles may have occurred. And I really highlight for moms how you take responsibility in the healing process. Ideally, the daughter's going to do so as well, but moms make mistakes. And just like we talked about in intimate relationships, it's important to take responsibility for our mistakes as a parent as well.
I love that. And it's true, as you mentioned earlier, there is a humorous lens to your book, but there's also a very serious side and also a deeply personal one. In fact, you write in your book that the last words you heard from your mother was, "You are the worst daughter in the world," and just how hard that was, and perhaps has even continued to be. So I want to say what went wrong with that relationship, but we don't need to necessarily add the judgment. What was the nature of your relationship with your mother?
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of history about that. Both my parents were immigrants. My dad was from Poland and a Holocaust survivor, so he had a pretty difficult. He had an extraordinarily difficult childhood and young adulthood. My mom, she was from Estonia, and her family fled to escape the Soviet Union to Sweden, and she was pretty much parented on her own. Her dad was, I had only met my grandpa once. He was very abusive, and her mom was very passive, and she didn't even want to go to her dad's funeral. My parents, when they got together, also considerable age difference. They were 13 years apart. My mom was barely even an adult when they met, and she didn't know what the heck she was doing. The truth is
Do any of us? Yeah, I get
right?
it.
But she didn't have parents to parent her. She was pretty much on her own as a young teen. Even though she had a roof under her head, she fended for herself. She made her own money. She did her own thing. She didn't get to. I don't even think she finished high school. My dad finished a fifth grade Polish education. So they came to this country and they spoke 11 languages between the two of them, and none of them was English. So they were learning a language, they were learning a culture. And then they had two children, my sister and myself, and they had no idea what they were doing. So my mother's role in her, what I would call the recreation of her own experience, was, okay, heavy hand. She considered herself to have turned out okay. So she raised us with a very heavy disciplinarian hand. And I was that good girl. I was that sweet, good, kind, oh my gosh, I want to be cuddled. I want to be loved. And my mom just didn't have that kind of energy or time for me. I often felt like I was a burden to my mom. If I was playing a game and I left something out for 5 minutes to be able to go to the bathroom, the game was picked up, put away, and then I was in trouble for not having done that. But I was still playing, getting her to play with us, not really common. She would much rather have hung out with the friends that she had made and talked on the phone. And so I just felt like a nuisance. As I grew up, though, I sometimes had a decent relationship with my mom and sometimes not. My mom took a path where, when she had sort of that, what they call that empty nest syndrome kind of thing, I think she felt that her life was meaningless by the time my sister had left home and I left home. And so in my 20s, I also, that's when I was doing college and graduate school, and I was getting into the world of psychology. And that was very threatening to her because all of a sudden I was looking at her differently. I wasn't looking at her as my mom and trying to fight for her approval and attention. I was saying, Mom, you got some issues here. Maybe you could get some help. Maybe you could deal with some of this stuff. Maybe you'd feel better if you would do this, do that. And she took kind of a turn for the worse. She had struggled with anorexia and some other things. And I don't need to out her or throw her under the bus here, because I love my mom, and I've always loved my mom. And so I was trying to get her help. And I really suggested to her that I thought it was really important that she seek some help, because I felt like she was really in a bad, depressed state. And she turned on me and she just said to me that, you know what, you're the worst daughter on the planet, because I wasn't supporting her woes and I wasn't feeling so sorry for her anymore, because there were so many options and opportunities for her to get better. And I also felt like, gosh, if she can do that, it's going to help me along so much too, because I had a lot of problems. I was a really unhappy at times kid. I had a lot of things going on. I acted out a lot, had my own bout with an eating disorder. So I thought, oh, this would be great for both of us. Let's not recreate the generational cycle of dysfunction. But she didn't have it. And 1 week after she said those words to me, she passed suddenly. No cause of death, just irreparable damage to her body. And it was tragic. So I spent the next few years after that, and my daughter was very young, mourning that loss and, questioning what I had done wrong and what I could have done differently, and feeling bad and feeling grief and feeling guilty and all that. And then I finally said, you know what? Those were words of a very sad person who was really threatened by something that I wanted to help offer to her. And so I let go of feeling bad about myself, and I let go of feeling bad about what I had said. And I understood that she was in so much pain that she just couldn't welcome in something that may have been better and different. So like I said, my first book I wrote was called Healing the Sensitive Heart, which I completely dedicated to her to help her, if she had any sense in whatever other world there is, that she knew that she was loved.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That sounds really hard on a lot of different levels. And it's interesting how earlier we were talking about how two adults in an intimate partnership need to both take responsibility for their stuff. But with a child parent, it's the parent's responsibility to do the work that needs to be done. And that's an interesting sort of phenomenon that occurs. It's interesting that you as a child felt like a burden. And that's something that often becomes internalized, right? When a child gets, we'll just say a bad parent, but we remove the judgment. When there's a child received not the best parenting, they tend to conclude something's wrong with them. Like, because you're not receiving love, the conclusion a child comes to is not that the parent is incapable of loving. It is that I am unloved or I am unlovable. And there must be
Yes.
something that is wrong with me. And we
Mhm.
have all sorts of coping strategies. And it sounds like your coping strategy was to try your absolute best to gain approval and to be the really good girl, to get that love that you should have received no matter how good or bad you were.
Yeah, 100%. And just to add to that a little bit, so I was the really good girl, and then I wasn't the really good girl, but I wasn't the really good girl in my mother's eyes because I continued to try to be the really good girl in front of her. I was the really bad girl behind her back. So that was
Mm.
my acting out. I was like, well, what she doesn't know won't hurt her. It was a terrible situation. But what you're saying is so important, because that is what children do, because we don't have the internal structure yet to delineate between what's someone else and what's me. So until we really develop those boundaries, the individuation process, the separation individuation process, where I am my own person and what you do is not necessarily a reflection on who I am, then we really can cross the line into our own ability to heal. But as long as we are perpetually burdened by the sense that whatever my mother says or whatever my father says, that is who I am, then of course we're going to feel that way. And not only saying who I am, but how they behave around me. And what you're describing, what I'm describing, is that if a parent is dismissive, I must not be worthy of attention. If a parent is angry, I must have done something wrong. If a parent is sad, oh no, I must not be loving her enough or him enough. So it becomes this difficult challenge for a child to not personalize something that is not personal. And then we have to, oftentimes as adults, we're working backwards to try to figure that out. And we find ourselves looking at our parents in a context. And that again is where healing occurs, is when we look at our parents in the context in which they were also a child. What happened to them? Not to excuse bad behavior. And certainly we're not talking about abuse, like downright abusive parents, although my parents certainly would have been considered as such in today's category. But I know that they had good hearts. I know that they meant well. And now I can look at them and know that they love me. But so many children turn out to be adults where they really just walk the earth believing that they weren't loved at all. And maybe they weren't, but there's a good chance that it was just that their parents did not have the ability to show that kind of love or to show that kind of kindness.
Yeah, let's talk about repairing that connection. Let's say I'm an adult daughter. We can just focus on that. And I get a text from my mom saying, you know what? I'd really like to repair our relationship. I apologize for not being the best mom. And my sort of gut emotional response is, well, too little, too late. Like, the damage has been done. I already have been in years of therapy trying to undo the damage that I kind of got as a child. How do we go on those first steps of repair, particularly with someone reluctant to enter into a relationship with someone who they feel like is a source of pain?
Thank you for that question. And I just want to say a little bit too about the therapy process, which when a lot of people come to that decision, well, it's too little, too late, and I've been in therapy and I need to just let go of you. one of the mistakes that many therapists make, especially those who are more novice, is they run with this concept of their patient or their client is a victim. They're a victim and they're hearing one side of things and they're not helping the person put their parents in a perspective or put them in a context. And so they perpetuate the sense of, I was a victim, you were a perpetrator, and now here we are, I have to let you go. And I don't believe in that philosophy. Sometimes, of course, I mean, I hear some stories that you would never want to hear or never want to be part of that are just, I have a patient who was molested by 3 generations of the men in her family ongoingly for years. They didn't take any ownership and responsibility. Best to keep them at bay for sure. Best to keep them away from her own children.
Not in
Because there
jail,
was,
but
right?
yes.
If they're not in jail, because they weren't, because she didn't
Firm
ever.
boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are extreme cases that I think definitely warrant that distance. So back to your question though. So let's say you have a daughter and the mom has reached out that way and the daughter has had that kind of therapy or has just made that decision. I think it's worth it for the mom to say, you know what? I'd like to hear more about that. I would really love to hear more from you about how you feel damaged. I'm ready to take that step. Now the mom has to do that from a genuine place. The mom, that's why in the book, there's a lot of healing for mom to get to the place. I really encourage someone to not reach out to their daughter until you've done the work suggested in the book that really gives you that ground for yourself, that ground of self-compassion, forgiving yourself for the mistakes that you made so that you can kind of take it, because you're probably going to get a mouthful. I worked with a lot of mother-daughter duos where the daughter, when she finally succumbs to, okay, I'm going to do this work with my mom, man, she gives it to her. She gives it to her 100%, feeling like because I've invited them in, then I'm going to make it safe for her to do that. And I help the mom as best I can and just stay present, to stay present. Again, those are her experiences, and we can empathize with someone's experiences, even if they weren't necessarily true. Because also there's a lot of distortion that goes on in children and in parents. We distort reality, not necessarily intentionally, but that's why we call it subjective reality, because there's very little objective reality when it comes to the experience in a relationship.
I love that. Basically, don't reach out until you've done the work. This is almost the
Yes,
prerequisite to reconnecting, is a bit of healing. And
absolutely.
when you are ready to reconnect, be ready to listen from a genuine, open-hearted place.
Open-hearted, big key word there, open-hearted, but also from a self-loving place, right? Because you may hear words, you may hear disgruntled attitude. You might hear a lot more of that sassy and rude and that attitude than you ever thought you were going to hear, because you've let the cat out of the bag. You have opened up Pandora's box. So there may be a lot there. And, a lot of young women, they coped with their mom's styles in a way that was, it was like a perfect fit. It was almost, this is the other piece to the puzzle, right? You do it this way, so I'm going to respond with this. You have when you factor in the developmental process of the need for separation and individuation and the child becoming their own person, that if mom is excessively in the daughter's life at that time when the daughter really wants some space and the mom just persists and persists and persists and is overly intrusive, you're probably going to get a daughter who's like, Mom, enough already, Mom. But they want to get that car, or they want to get their clothes, so they comply to some degree. That's not until they're on their own, especially if they're financially on their own, that they can really give their mom the finger and say, that's it, I don't have to deal with you anymore. So that's when moms will often have an awakening to go, oh, if I want a relationship with my adult daughter now, I have to change my ways. I have to figure out a different energy and a different style of being with her.
Absolutely. So interestingly, I recently heard the term almond mom, almond like the nut, which essentially is like diet focused moms that tend to kind of pass on certain eating disorders onto their daughters. And I feel like almond mom is just one archetype of many. And in your book, you write about nervous moms, woo woo moms, perfectionist moms, deprecating moms. So, how do we work with these archetypes that you were describing? Like if I suddenly realize, holy cow, I'm the perfectionist mom, what kind of a mom do I want to become?
Yeah. And again, some of these categories or all these categories are trying to create something that a mom can relate to. Oh, I see that, because in each one of those, I describe a story, and there's a story about that kind of mom and what happens with their daughter, so that people, when they're reading something, often want to feel like, oh, there's someone else. I get that. So I try to do it in a really loving way. So you understand that, look, there's a lot of good things that come out of that, right? Perfectionistic moms can actually yield daughters who are very conscientious about doing well in the world, being successful, creating strong relationships with people, but it also has a downside. The downside is that you could be nitpicky. It's like, would you want to go to a picnic with a surgeon who was dissecting everything that you brought in the picnic? I'd rather go with somebody, but I want that surgeon to do my heart surgery. But I don't necessarily want that attitude when I'm having a picnic with someone. So the perfectionist who cannot give anything else is going to create boxes that are not going to be good for her. So the idea of these archetypes, if you will, and I would not go as far as that I've created any archetypes here, just some fun categories for people to appreciate that maybe, and there's a little bit of each probably in most of us, because most perfectionists are also nervous. Most people who have tendencies toward lots of these things, but maybe we have a little bit more of a dominant style than the other.
And is there a category or just certain qualities of moms that would be good to embody beyond the nervous, woo-woo, perfectionist, deprecating moms? What's the more positive roles?
The positives are the things that we talked about at the beginning of the show was compassion, empathetic, but also clear with one's boundaries, being very clear about who oneself is, but in a loving way, right? We can recreate our own wounds. If we haven't done our own healing from our own childhood, and I don't mean in a way that we've put our parents in a box and we've said they're bad and I'm good and I'm going to move forward, because that's not healing. Healing, again, is understanding what went wrong, what I was missing. How do I give that to myself? Understanding the motivations, the intentions, the experiences of our own caregivers, how that happened. And it's a really full picture. And then we're kind of picking and choosing, kind of what works best in this world. I'm a total advocate for loving with limits. So in our relationships, we love, but we still have our limits. And we recognize what those are. And when we have self-confidence and we're not paralyzed by shame and blame and self-doubt, then we can say those with clarity, but again, with gentle clarity. Because some people are like a bull in the china shop. It's like, I'm tired of this. Stop doing this with me or to you. Stop it. I can't stand it anymore. That doesn't do you any good. But saying, you know what, I'm getting to a place where I find that I'm not so willing to give up my time as much to do those things for you. You're an adult now. I love you dearly. If there's some way I can help you become more self-sufficient in those ways, I'm happy to assist. But otherwise, you know what? I think I need to save and preserve some of my time for some of the things that are more appealing to me.
I love that. Loving with limits, in this case, boundaries. So I'm curious the advantage to doing this work. So, for example, I'm an adult daughter, and it's like I could reach out to my mother. We don't have potentially the best relationship, but I got a lot on my plate. I don't want to open up that can of worms. Why might somebody want to begin this work of repairing one's relationship with their mother?
Well, I happen to think, because I didn't get to have that really much in my adult life, that the mother-daughter relationship is a really beautiful and special bond. And I'm not at all dissing the father-son relationship or the father-daughter relationship, but each one of those has its specialness. And so I probably picked this one to write about because it was such a sad space for me that I didn't have that. So I hope that people get the message here that that is a beautiful gift that you can have in your life if, again, your mom's willing to take some responsibility for the ways in which she may have hurt the daughter unintentionally. It's not a book about mothers who intentionally or sadistic moms. It's not a book about them. It's not a book for them because they're not going to pick it up anyway. This is generally a book about moms who have a bit of a bleeding heart, who did the best that they could, who wanted to just love the crap out of their kids. I don't know a nicer way to say that. Well, just love them in a way that, there were no boundaries. And so I'm going to say to daughters, wow, you have a really ripe opportunity here. If your mom's willing to do that work with you, there's something really special and magnificent. And you can get to a level, you can get to a place, better yet, of creating a healing tree that you can have somebody who is not only the person who birthed you and raised you, but a person who's going to be in your court and rally for you for your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Love that. So as we're winding down, I'm just curious if there's anything you have to add, if there's any concept that's we haven't touched on yet.
I just want people to walk away from listening here to know that there is hope, that even when things feel particularly hopeless, there's probably a little bit more that you can do. And that's not to say that there are some times when it's just not the right time, and it may never be the right time. I don't want to be the eternal optimist here, because there are conditions, like we talked about at the beginning, there are certain relationships that are just not going to happen. So I get that. But those are really fewer and farther between than those that really, if you just get in there and you get through the mud, you can have something that's really magnificent and special. So try it. What have you got to lose? If it's already not working, you try one more thing. I know it's a lot, but it might be really worth it.
Wonderful. I love the message of hope. So wonderful. I do believe in love, and I think that any relationship has the potential to be repaired and to bring more connection and understanding to our lives. So thank you so much, Dr. Debra Mandel, for coming on to the show. I do have to finish by asking the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
Oh, that it's precious. It's absolutely precious and worthy of a lot of TLC.
Absolutely. Dr. Debra Mandel, author of Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude, also author of some other books such as Don't Call Me a Drama Queen and Dump That Chump. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so best place is to go to my website at www.drdebraonline.com. That's DRDEBRA online.com. And it'll direct you to all my social media. And, please check out the book. It's on Amazon and other book retailers. Sassy and Rude, Her New Attitude. And I hope it brings you some hope and some healing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Mandel. I appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. I appreciate your very hopeful message that we can repair relationships and we can cultivate more connection. And I appreciate your own sassiness, your own humorousness, combined with just a very grounded, down-to-earth wisdom, and also just decades of experience. And your clients are lucky to have you, and all of our listeners are lucky to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Zach. You're a wonderful host, and I appreciate you including me in your audience.
Wonderful. Wow, what an incredible interview. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you remember all of the valuable lessons that Dr. Debra shared with us today, including being in a relationship means taking responsibility for your role in it. Because there aren't strict rules anymore about how relationships are supposed to be, you now must have really impeccable communication to define what each of your tasks and challenges are in the relationship, while recognizing things will be ever changing. You can love your children fully with limits by having healthy boundaries. And bring love into your relationship through compassion, empathy, nurturance, respect, values, and understanding. Rather than have a child-centered family, create a family-centered family. And for those of you mothers looking to reach out to your adult daughters, don't reach out until you've done the work. And be ready to listen from a genuine, open-hearted place. Remember, love is precious. Remember, you are perfect just the way you are. You are lovable, loving, and loved.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.